My children tried to prove I was insane in court. Their main evidence? I left my $2 million fortune to a dog. Make sure you subscribe because they were not prepared for the secret I was about to reveal and the surprise air I brought with me. My name is Eleanor, and I have discovered that the loudest silence in the world is a large, empty house that was once filled with the chaotic symphony of a family. After my husband, Robert, passed, the echoes of laughter faded, replaced by the polite, infrequent phone calls from my children, David and Catherine. They're successful, terribly busy, and their calls have taken on a predictable rhythm, a checklist of concerns that feels more like a risk assessment than love. "Just checking in, Mom. How are you feeling?" they'd ask. A question that wasn't really about my feelings, but a thinly veiled inquiry into my mortality. I had become the aging custodian of their future inheritance. To escape the deafening quiet, I started volunteering at the local animal shelter. It was a noisy, chaotic place, but it was honest. And that's where I met Barney. He wasn't a puppy full of boundless energy. He was an old golden retriever, surrendered after his owner had passed away, with sad, wise eyes that seemed to hold a quiet understanding of grief. While others clamored for the young, playful dogs, I found myself sitting on the concrete floor with Barney. He didn't jump or lick. He just rested his heavy, graying head on my knee and let out a long, contented sigh, a shared language of loss that needed no words. I started taking him for walks, and soon, with the shelter's permission, on visits to the nearby children's hospital. Our first visit was to the oncology ward. I will never forget a little boy named Sam, no older than 7, who hadn't spoken a word in the 3 weeks since his last surgery. He was pale and withdrawn, huddled in his bed. I asked his tired-looking mother if we could come in. She just shrugged, hopeless. I didn't push. I just sat in a chair by the bed, and Barney lay on the floor, his head resting on his paws. After a few minutes, he lifted his head, looked at the boy, and let out a soft, low woof. Sam's eyes, which had been staring blankly at the wall, flickered down to the dog. A tiny, frail hand emerged from under the blanket and hesitantly reached down, its fingers sinking into Barney's thick, soft fur. For 20 minutes, they stayed like that, a silent connection forming in the sterile room. We did this every day for a week. On the 5th day, as we were about to leave, a tiny whisper came from the bed. "Barney." The mother burst into tears. It was the first word he had spoken. That is the moment I understood. This wasn't just a hobby. This was a mission. My bond with Barney wasn't just about my own loneliness. It was a force for healing. He became the center of my world. We were a team. It was after one of these visits that the idea, bold and brilliant, struck me. It was an act of defiance against my children's polite indifference, an act of love for the creature who had given me a new purpose, an act of finally being seen for who I was, not for what I would leave behind. The next day, I sat in my family lawyer's office. $2 million, I stated, my voice clear and steady, the bulk of my estate. I want to leave it to Barney. Mr. Hemlock, a man who had known me for 40 years, blinked. "To the dog, Eleanor?" "Yes," I said, a slow, confident smile spreading across my face. "To my partner, my coworker, and my dear, loyal friend, Barney. My children saw me as a living relic, a keeper of their inheritance. They had no idea that I had just signed a document that would turn their cold, pragmatic expectations to dust. And they couldn't possibly imagine that the main character in my final act was a sad-eyed golden retriever who is busy changing the world one small, whispered word at a time. I knew the contents of my new will wouldn't stay secret for long. In a world of old money and even older gossip, secrets are a form of currency. The leak, when it came, was from an entirely predictable source, a junior partner at Mr. Hemlock's law firm who just happened to play tennis with my son David's wife. A casual, "You won't believe what happened at the office today," over cocktails, was all it took. The first ripple reached me 3 days later in the form of a phone call from my daughter, Catherine. Her tone was overly sweet, a syrupy layer of concern that barely concealed the panic beneath it. "Mom, hi, just calling to see how you are," she chirped a little too brightly. "Are you getting out enough? Eating well? You seemed a little distant last time we spoke." I was in my garden, watching Barney chase a squirrel, the phone pressed to my ear. I knew she wasn't asking about my health. She was probing for signs of senility. "I'm quite well, Catherine, thank you. Actually, I've never been busier." Her frustration crackled over the line. "Busier? With what?" "My projects," I said, simply, offering no further explanation. The silence on her end was a confession in itself. She wanted to scream about the will, about the dog, but she couldn't. Not yet. That would be too direct, too crass. So she just sputtered a few more pleasantries and hung up. But I could almost hear the frantic phone calls buzzing across the country, from her law office in Chicago to David's real estate empire in New York. I could picture it perfectly. My daughter, Catherine, would be focused on the social humiliation. What will people say? Our mother is leaving her fortune to a dog? David, my son, ever the pragmatist, would already be talking about legal strategies. We need to get power of attorney. We need to find a doctor who can testify. We need to prove she's incompetent before she gives everything away. They would speak of me, not as their mother, but as a faulty asset, a portfolio that was suddenly performing erratically and needed to be brought under control. The irony was almost painful. For years, they had treated me with a polite, functional indifference, seeing me as little more than a placeholder for their inheritance. Now that they believed that inheritance was threatened by a golden retriever, they were suddenly consumed with a passionate, albeit entirely selfish, concern for my well-being. The confirmation that the storm was about to make landfall came on Friday evening. A short, formal text from David. No greeting, no pleasantries, just 5 cold words. "Mom, I'm flying in tomorrow. We need to talk." The whispers about my crazy will were spreading faster than a wildfire, just as I knew they would. I looked at Barney, who was now asleep at my feet, his paws twitching as he dreamed. The storm was coming, but my son wasn't flying 1,000 miles to understand the truth of my new joy. He was coming to wage a war for the money he already considered his. And for the first time in a very long time, I was ready for a fight. David arrived the next day looking every bit the New York real estate mogul he was. Expensive suit, polished shoes that seemed to disapprove of my slightly dusty welcome mat, and a leather briefcase that he clutched like a weapon. He didn't hug me. He gave my shoulder a brief, awkward pat and walked into the living room, his eyes scanning the familiar, comfortable space as if he were assessing a property for demolition. Barney, who had been dozing at my feet, lifted his head and let out a low, soft growl. He had better instincts than I had given him credit for. "You should really do something about this dog smell, Mom," he said, his nose wrinkling. It was his opening salvo. I sat down in my favorite armchair, gesturing for him to take the couch opposite me. Barney rested his head back on my feet, a warm, reassuring weight. "He lives here, David," I said calmly. "The house is supposed to smell like the people and the dogs who live in it." He ignored that, placing his briefcase on the couch beside him with a heavy thud. He leaned forward, elbows on his knees, and adopted a look of grave theatrical concern. It was his negotiation face, the one I'd seen him use on business calls. "Mom, I flew all the way from New York because we're worried. Catherine's worried sick. We've been hearing things about the will." "I'm perfectly fine, David, and my will is my own affair," I replied, my voice even. His mask of concern slipped, revealing the raw frustration beneath. "It stops being your own affair when you're leaving $2 million to a stray dog instead of your own children. People are talking, Mom. Our family friends, people at the firm. They think you're losing your mind. And frankly, so do we." I looked at my son, at the man I had raised, and felt a profound, bottomless sadness. He hadn't flown 1,000 miles to ask me about my new passion, about the joy I'd found working with sick children. He hadn't asked about Barney, the gentle soul who had filled the crushing silence in my life. He had flown here to protect his investment. "This isn't about the money," he insisted, as if reading my thoughts. "You're vulnerable, a grieving widow. It's a classic story. Some organization, some person has clearly latched onto you through this dog and is influencing you. We need to contest this. We need to get you evaluated for your own protection." There it was, the threat wrapped in the language of love. He was going to try and prove I was insane. He saw a senile old woman being manipulated, a problem to be managed, a faulty asset to be secured. The thought of fighting him, of the ugly legal battle that lay ahead, was exhausting. For a moment, I almost considered giving in, just for the sake of peace. I looked at my son, at his handsome, angry face, and I felt a strange sense of calm settle over me. The fear I had anticipated simply wasn't there. For the first time, I wasn't his mother who needed to soothe his temper. I was just a woman watching a grown man panic about money. "Do what you feel you must, David," I said, my voice so quiet it seemed to absorb all the tension in the room. "But I assure you, my mind is clearer than it has been in many years." His face tightened. My calm was not the reaction he had expected. He had come here for a fight, for tears, for a negotiation. He didn't know what to do with my peace. He picked up his briefcase, gave me one last hard look, and left, the front door closing with a sharp, definitive Click. I watched his expensive rental car disappear down the driveway. When it was gone, I took a deep, steadying breath. The mask of the frail, slightly confused old woman fell away. I walked over to my desk, Barney trotting quietly beside me, and turned on my laptop. The screen came to life, showing a scheduled video conference. I put on my reading glasses, clicked Join Meeting, and my screen filled with the faces of the other 5 members of my board. "Good afternoon, Eleanor," said a kind-faced woman. "How are things?" "Everything is proceeding as planned, Maria," I replied, my tone shifting from maternal softness to professional efficiency. "Now, let's review the architectural blueprints for the new pediatric wing. I have some notes on the sensory integration room." For the next hour, I was not a grieving widow or a mad old woman. I was the founder and chairwoman of the Barney Foundation for Animal-Assisted Therapy, a multi-million-dollar charitable organization I had been secretly building for the past 2 years with the inheritance my husband had left me. The shell corporations and offshore accounts David had accused me of being duped by were in fact the legal and financial structures I had created to fund my life's new work without my children's interference. Barney, the supposed sole heir to my fortune, was not just a dog. He was our mascot, our inspiration, and our namesake. He was the gentle, furry face of a project that was already helping hundreds of sick children and veterans across the state. My son left, convinced of my madness, planning a legal war to save me from myself. He had no idea I had just finished approving a 7-figure budget for a new rehabilitation wing that would bear his father's name. They thought I had lost my mind. In reality, I had finally found my purpose, and their humiliation, when the time came, would be swift, surgical, and absolute. My children moved faster than I had anticipated. The following week, I was summoned to a formal meeting at Mr. Hemlock's office. When I arrived, the scene in the sterile, wood-paneled conference room was exactly as I had pictured it. On one side of the long, polished table sat my children, David and Catherine, their faces grim and determined. Beside them was a sharp young lawyer with hungry eyes, his briefcase open and files neatly arranged before him. On the other side sat Mr. Hemlock and me. Barney was waiting with a trusted volunteer in a park just down the street. The air was thick with a hostility so profound it felt like I could taste it. My children didn't look at me. They looked at my lawyer, as if I were a child who couldn't speak for herself. Their lawyer began, his voice smooth and condescending. "Mr. Hemlock, Eleanor," he started, "my clients are here today out of deep love and concern. They have reason to believe that Eleanor's recent eccentric decisions, specifically regarding the primary beneficiary of her estate, are indicative of a diminished mental capacity likely brought on by grief. They are prepared to begin legal proceedings to establish a conservatorship to protect their mother and the family's legacy from what is clearly an instance of undue influence." It was all there, the entire playbook. Eccentric, diminished capacity, undue influence. They had painted a perfect picture of a senile old woman being taken advantage of. I watched my children as he spoke. David nodded grimly, the dutiful son forced to take a hard step. Catherine dabbed at a perfectly dry eye with a handkerchief, the heartbroken daughter. It was a magnificent performance. They had, it seemed, inherited some of their father's theatricality. When his lawyer finished, a heavy silence fell over the room. He looked at us, triumphant, expecting us to crumble. This was the moment Mr. Hemlock had been waiting for. He let the silence stretch for a long, uncomfortable moment. He slowly and deliberately steepled his fingers, looking at David and Catherine with an expression not of anger, but of profound, weary pity. This was the slow, beautiful pause you had asked for, the moment before the world shifts. "Thank you, Mr. Albright," he said finally, his voice calm and measured. "That was a very thorough presentation." Then he turned his gaze to my children. "Before we discuss the legal merits of diminished capacity, I'd like to talk about your mother's character. For the past 2 years, since your father's passing, your mother has dedicated over 30 hours a week, every week, to volunteer work. She has spent her time not in grief-stricken isolation, but in the pediatric oncology ward, comforting sick children. She has spent her time at the Veterans Center, helping men who have seen the worst of the world find a moment of peace." He paused again, letting his words sink in. My children just stared, confused. This was not part of their script. "He has done all of this," Mr. Hemlock continued, his voice resonating with a quiet power, "with her partner in this endeavor, a therapy dog named Barney. The same dog you seem to believe is the sole recipient of her fortune." I sat there in that cold conference room surrounded by my own children who were trying to legally erase me, to prove I was insane. They thought they had me cornered, that their case was airtight. They had no idea that I had brought my key witness with me, and he was waiting just outside the door. David and Catherine stared at Mr. Hemlock, their faces a mixture of confusion and impatience. My volunteer work was a sentimental distraction. What did it have to do with the legal matter of my incompetence? Mr. Hemlock smiled faintly. "I believe," he said, pressing a button on the conference room phone, "it's time you met the beneficiary in person." A moment later, the heavy oak door opened. A young woman, one of the shelter volunteers, walked in. And trotting calmly beside her, his tail giving a gentle, happy wag, was Barney. He was wearing a smart, professional-looking blue vest, and embroidered on the side in neat golden thread were the words, "The Barney Foundation for Animal-Assisted Therapy." Barney padded over to me and rested his head on my knee. The volunteer handed Mr. Hemlock a large leather-bound portfolio. "What is this?" David demanded, his voice sharp. "This," Mr. Hemlock said, opening the portfolio and placing it in the center of the table with a solid, definitive thud, "is the Barney Foundation, a fully registered, federally approved 501c3 non-profit charitable organization, founded by your mother 2 years ago." He began to slide documents across the polished table toward my stunned children and their now very pale lawyer. the articles of incorporation, the list of the board of directors, which included 2 respected doctors and a university philanthropist, the architectural blueprints for the new therapy wing at the Children's Hospital, the audited financial statements showing the millions of dollars in seed money I had already personally and anonymously donated. Your mother's will, Mr. Hemlock continued, his voice the very definition of calm authority, does not in fact leave $2 million to a dog. It leaves $2 million to a legally established, and I might add, highly successful, charitable foundation. A foundation which, for branding and fundraising purposes, is named after its lead therapy animal and official mascot. The silence in the room was absolute. I looked at my children. The color had drained from David's face. Catherine's hand was pressed against her mouth, her eyes wide with a dawning, horrified understanding. They saw it all now. Their greed, their condescension, the monumental, humiliating error they had made. They hadn't come here to save a senile mother from a dog. They had come here to try and dismantle the life's work of a competent, powerful philanthropist. I stood up, my hand resting on Barney's soft, warm head. I looked at my children, not with anger, not with triumph, but with a quiet, aching sadness. I was going to name you both as honorary members of the board, I said, my voice clear and steady. I had hoped you would want to be a part of this, a part of your father's legacy. I paused. But now, I think you both first need to learn what it truly means to care about something other than yourselves. And with that, I turned, and Barney and I walked out of the room, leaving them alone in the ruins of their own greed. Thank you for being here. A like and a subscription would mean so much.